My titles are very precise and very, they're often very literal. It's what it is. But at the same time, they could be, double-edged, as it is with Piss Christ. When I was about 8 years old, I went to religious instruction, meaning it was only 1 hour or 2 hours a day, once a week, to prepare for Holy Communion. And so I made my communion. A couple of years later, at the age of 12, I believe, I made my confirmation. I remember at the time when I made my confirmation, the nuns who taught the religious instruction, the nuns said, once you're confirmed, it means you become a soldier of God. So after the age of 13, I stopped going to church, but I have always remained a soldier of God. I had worked in an advertising agency in the 70s. Early in maybe 70, 71. I think the most important thing I got from working in advertising is learning the power of images and also how to use words to convey feelings, to sell products, and to sell ideas. And so, that's when I realized that the soundbite, the thing that you read, the few words you read in an ad, they should catch your attention and stay with you and sound good and sell you something. And so I've always used that experience in advertising, for instance, for my titles. And my titles are very precise and very, they're often very literal. It's what it is. But at the same time, they could be, double-edged, as it is with Piss Christ. My early work is what I consider tableau photography. There's a person or a subject, there's a background, and so I started doing scenes, and they were very complicated ideas and scenes and elaborate, but I was coming up with new ideas and new things every day, and so that's what I started doing early on. And very few of the early works exist, except for a few. One of them that has been a favorite of mine, an early piece, is something called Cabeza de Vaca. It's a cow's head and coat from 1984. But at some point, I remember I had a visit from a curator at the New Museum, a senior curator named Bill Olander. And Bill was doing a show called Fake. It was, had all these postmodernist artists. And he came and made a studio visit. And Bill had put me in a couple of shows before, and I always felt funny because I was completely unknown, and these other people were very known. And so after his visit, though, I felt like my work did not really fit in what he was doing. But his visit made me think about doing something I had never thought about. And that was to make fake paintings or to make images that look like paintings but were photographs. And so that's where the bodily fluids started. They were the first ones. And the first bodily fluid image is called Milk Blood. It's a red square next to a white square. And there are two tanks filled with blood, and one with blood, one with milk. And they refer to Mondrian. So that is my first bodily fluid image. And then I continued making images that were abstract using bodily fluids. And eventually I did a monochrome called blood, or a monochrome called milk, a monochrome called piss. And then at some point, and then I started to mix the different fluids together. But then at some point, a few months later, I decided to do what someone later termed the immersions, meaning I put an object into a tank, And the first immersion that I made was Piss Christ, which is a crucifix immersed in a tank full of urine. Piss Christ for me was an extension of earlier work. When I was doing the Tableau setups, I did a few religious pieces, one called The Rabble. It's a crucifix with a small mountain of chicken claws reaching up to Christ. I did some other images that related or used Christ. And so when I did the Piss Christ, it was a matter of combining the representation aspect of my work with the abstract fluid images. And so when I put a cross into the urine, it was just an extension of the religious work that I had been doing before the fluids. What happened to me at that time was I was getting a lot of flack and feeling heat and, being criticized and being denounced in the press. So I told my dealer at the time, Stefan Stux of Stux Gallery, I said, listen, Stefan, I feel the heat. I feel like I have to prove myself as an artist. I need a new show. And he said to me, Andre, frankly, we lost money on your last show. We only sold one piece, and that was to an artist collector in the gallery. So I can't afford to give you another show. And so he advised me to look for another gallery. So this was in the summer of 1989. So I started looking around for a couple of galleries. Finally, 3 weeks after he told me he couldn't give me a show, he left a message on my answering machine, and he said, Andre, listen, I reconsidered, and I think you should have the show, and you should have a show, and we'll schedule one for December. Now, I've heard more than one person say to me that they spoke to Stux and said, listen, what are you, crazy? This guy is front page news. How could you not give him a show? And so that show in December, turned everything around with my career. I got the best review of my life in the New York Times, and I sold a lot of work because of it. So that's, how I came to become, a better known artist than I was before Piss Christ. After, doing the bodily fluids, at some point I felt like, oh, let me move on to something else. And one of the things that I went to is portraiture. I wanted to do portraits. Now, the portraits that I did were portraits of homeless people, and I called them the Nomads. And they were portraits that I did late at night in the subways of homeless people. But I took two assistants, and I had a backdrop and equipment, flash equipment. And so we did studio portraits of these homeless people in the subways late at night. And that work was influenced and was a reference to Edward Curtis's work of Native Americans at the turn of the century. I very much admire what he did. And he also often had backdrops. And, somebody once said to me, you made these people look very dignified. You gave them so much dignity. And I said, I didn't give those people anything they don't have already. They came with the dignity. All I did was I lit them well, and I, positioned them in such a way that made them look good. Because, eventually, that's the bottom line. I try to make everything look good. So after the Nomads, I thought, well, I would like to do portraits, some more portraits, but I thought, I want them to be unusual portraits. And if someone had a mask on, that would be an unusual portrait, because a mask conceals rather than reveals something about the person. And so when I thought of masked people, though, I immediately thought of the Klan. And because I'm not white, I'm Hispanic, I thought, that's a challenge. Now, if I was a white artist, I don't know if I would have done the work, because it wouldn't have been the same. So I got in touch with a couple of people that I knew in Atlanta. I had been there before. And one person, actually, I think both persons, referred me to someone named Bobby, a woman in Georgia who worked closely with the Ku Klux Klan, specifically with James Venable, who was the ex-imperial wizard of the Klan. So I called Bobby up, and I told her I want to come down and photograph the Klan. And she said, sure thing, And she said, actually, if you come down in September, they'll all be here, all the Klans people around the world, country, because they all come for this celebration and rally, you know, in Stonebrook City, which is where she was. And so I said, okay, I said, but I gotta tell you one thing, Bobby, I'm not white, I'm Hispanic. Is that gonna be a problem? And she said to me, it won't be a problem at all, baby. So, but it was a problem because when I went down there, you know, I realized that Bobby does not like being around the Klan when they all come to town. And so she wasn't there, and I had to face and meet with James Venable, who was kind of, as she's put it, she said he's old and senile. And so I hung around Atlanta for a couple of weeks, and eventually David Holland and other people posed for me. Now, the interesting thing was very, not odd moment, but it was a great moment for me, because when I met David Holland, you know, we arranged to meet in a park late at night, and you know, it's like 11 o'clock. When I say a park, it's the woods somewhere, and you know, I'm there with my assistant. A car pulls up, headlights in the dark, and a man comes out. Two men come out, and one of them turns to the other man and said, "This is the notorious Andres Serrano." So, but for David Holland, the Imperial Wizard, to call me notorious, that was quite an honor. So he called me the notorious Andres Serrano. Most of my work is staged, meaning it's in the studio with a backdrop. Now, I went to Cuba for the first time in my life in 2012 to take pictures. And there, you know, I did some studio work, but at the same time, I also took pictures of Cuba, because I couldn't just go to Cuba and take pictures in a studio. So, but I took pictures with my flash, the way always, and even outdoors, indoors, didn't matter, flash and daylight, available light. And a friend of mine said, "Oh, these are not Serranos. These are like any photojournalist could take those pictures." So he was saying, in order for it to be a Serrano, it needs to be conceptual in a studio. You know, it was interesting. You know, it's funny because when I came back from Cuba, we were there 1 month. I photographed Havana, mostly, and then I didn't feel like, I felt like I had to go back because I wanted to photograph outside of Havana. So I went back for 2 weeks and made a road trip with a van, 8 people, driver, crew, friends, and we went around from Havana to Baracoa and back, from one end of Cuba to the other, and hit Santiago, Camagüey, Trinidad, a lot of different cities on the way, and stayed overnight. Now, I was very excited about that trip. So when I come back, I'm talking to somebody, and I tell them, yeah, it was my first time in Cuba, and I did this. 1 minute later, the person says to me, "So what was it like to go back to Cuba?" And I'm thinking to myself, motherfucker, didn't I just tell you it was my first time in Cuba? And it's like, they always want to say, you're from over there, you're not from here. And so that's why I have this battle where people calling, you know, I've been called Puerto Rican, I've been called Haitian, I've been called Dominican, I've been called a lot of things. Just call me an American artist. That's all I want to be called, an American artist born in New York City.